What's up everybody, how are you doing? Shake my hand, it's Ben Kim and welcome back to the 2.4 Pre-PT channel. Today we are going to talk about how I studied and how you can study for the GRE in just 2 months. Coming up. Alright, so let's start with some of the resources that I used for the GRE. So I used the Kaplan GRE book, which is about only $20 on Amazon, and I also use the Magoosh GRE Vocabulary App, which is free. On a side note, I know a lot of people are going to ask me if I used the online Magoosh program. I did not. I've heard it costs anywhere from $150 to $775 for 6 months. It depends on if you catch it on a sale. And I've heard mixed things about it. A lot of people found it very helpful, and some people just found it very overwhelming. So I guess it kind of depends on the type of learner you are. But for me, just using the Kaplan GRE book, which is only $20, and using the Magoosh GRE Vocabulary Flashcards app, that was suffice for me. One more thing before we get into the 3 phases, guys. I've actually created a Google Doc with how I would have broken down everything in this study plan into days for the whole about 7 to 8 weeks, and just know that for this, like, this is how I would break it down. And you know, things always happen in life, so you can definitely adjust the schedule. Some things that take me a day might take you guys 2 or 3 days, and conversely, some days that might take me 2 or 3 days might only take you 1 day. So just adapt this to how you need to adapt it, but this is pretty much like a base calendar model for you. And also, I just want to say, guys, like, a good amount of studying per day is about 2 to 4 hours for the GRE, but at the same time, you learn how to break that up, learn how to pace it, right? Because you don't want to fatigue yourself and just sprint all that in one go. Because if you go hard for the first 2 hours and the last 2 hours you're just dead, that's not good. You're not really retaining information. So make sure you pace yourself, give yourself breaks. And if you need to split it like 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, whatever you gotta do. And I don't expect you guys to just go 4 hours every single day. Like, if you guys need a break, take your breaks. So just adjust this schedule and calendar to how you see fits best. All right, now with that said, let's move on to the rest of the video. Alright guys, so phase 1, this is the learning and applying phase. This is kind of the phase where we go through the text and we learn how the test makers come up with these questions and what are the usual type of answer choices that they give, like how do they typically trick you. And just realize, like I said earlier, this is a standardized test. So once you figure all this stuff out, it becomes a lot easier. This is also where you're gonna learn a lot of the technical stuff. A lot of people that I've talked to have trouble with math. There's a lot of formulas. There's a bunch of different things that you need to know. And so for this, like, flashcards might help. But also, for this whole process, for this first 2 weeks, I want you guys to really take notes on what you're reading about, and like, because they go over a lot of strategy. They go over how to break it down. Like in the Kaplan book, they have the Kaplan method, so they teach you their approach of like, okay, when you have this kind of problem, this is how we break it down. First, try to think about it this way, then this way. It just pretty much trains you how to think and how to see the problem, so that when you see it, you know how to break it down. It's basically training you to have that test maker's perspective. And when you have that, the questions become a lot easier. All right guys, so phase 1, this is the learning and applying phase. This is where we're gonna go through the mostly text, and we're gonna learn how to understand like what are the different question types there are. And for each question type, like, how do we break it down? What are the common right and wrong answers? The Kaplan book, I think, does a fantastic job of this, and they call it the Kaplan method. So whatever type of problem it is, they have a method in how to approach these problems step by step. And they also talk about, like, for reading comprehension, for the different types of problems, and what are the common right and wrong answers for each type of problem. So that's really helpful, and it gets you to start thinking in the test takers or test makers perspective. And when you can think like that, things become a lot easier. So during this phase, really take it seriously. It's really important, one of the most important phases to me. So make sure you write and take notes. For the math section, it goes over all the possible different types of math problems. I know for some of my mentees, what helped for them with all the formulas was actually doing flashcards. So that helps you. Consider doing that, whatever works for you. And just just like I mentioned earlier, guys, take breaks if you need it. I know reading a lot, especially when it's just reading and not so much doing, it can be really tiresome. It can really fatigue you really fast. I know for me, like I had to take breaks, or I had to break it up into 2 separate parts of the day. So do whatever works for you. And also in the Kaplan book, after you learn how to approach these problems, they'll also have practice problems too. Not many, but they'll have practice problems for you to test it out yourself. And so that way, right after you learn it, you can start applying it and getting a feel for it. All right, so now phase 2. This phase I call self-test with no time and review and assessment. So during this phase, I don't want you guys to just like be out of time and guess a random one and move on, because the point of this phase is really just to be exposed to all the possible different problem types and to just really see what you know and what you don't know. And then once you're done with the test, to actually go through it, like spend that time and actually review the mistakes, take notes on your mistakes, so that like if you have a few days go by and you forget your mistakes, you can go back to it, you can see why you made it, you can see how to solve those kind of problems again without having to dig through the book, which can kind of take a lot of time. Aside from that, I would also recommend you guys use the Magoosh GRE flashcards app that I was talking about earlier. It's free and basically gives you, I think it's like at least 15 decks of cards. And so basically you're going through these decks of cards, and every time you get it wrong, it brings it back up multiple times, and you have to get it right a certain amount of times until you master the card. I think the more times you get it wrong, the more times you have to get it right. And so it's a great way of really forcing that into your memory. The key with this, as with everything, is consistency. Make sure you're doing it every day. That way, like if you learn, say 2 decks and you wait a week and you go back to it, chances are you're probably gonna forget like half of those words. So the key I would say is consistency. I would go through a deck, try to master a whole deck a day. That usually takes maybe around 45 minutes, give or take 15 minutes, just depending on like how you are with learning vocab words. But yeah, go through a deck a day. When you start the new deck the next day, review the deck from yesterday first, or review all the decks you've mastered first. And honestly, it shouldn't take long, because like when I say master these decks, you really go through these words so many times that you actually master these words. So honestly, if I were to master a deck and go back to that deck the next day, I could go through that whole deck maybe in like 5 minutes, and it's just like that fast. You just get it that down. So I highly recommend that. And lastly, as a bonus tip, try to find a GRE partner, study partner who is good at your weakness. So when I was studying for the GRE, I had a little GRE study group, and the people I studied with, or people that were in my study group, they were better than me at verbal. So they would kind of help me with the qualitative stuff. And for me, like I was better at quantitative, so I would teach them the quantitative stuff that they didn't understand. So if you can do that, find a study buddy who's good at your weakness and you're good at their weakness. That's perfect. I definitely recommend it, and that'll be great for after you're done with the practice test and you're going through the problems. Like your book should kind of explain how they got to the answer, but if that still isn't enough, make sure you reach out for help. Make sure if you have a study partner, they can help you. If not, like find somebody that actually gets that part and have them help you. The worst thing you can do is just move on and never figure it out. Because here's the thing, especially with like the math section, if you figure out how to do that kind of problem, the next time you see it, it's practically free points. All right guys, so next phase 2.5, this is when we're gonna learn about the essay. There's the issue and argument essay. Kaplan does a great job of explaining both. For me, what helped was getting feel for just like the type of essay questions and actually reading the essays that scored a 6 with it. For that, you can use the Kaplan book. They have a couple examples, but also on ets.org, I'll link it down below, but you can go to this site where they show you a bunch of pretty much every possible essay prompt that they could ask you, and you can also find sample essays for those. So if you can find like the 6s and get an idea of how the 6s structured their essays and what they did to get a 6, then you can start modeling that. And remember, like it's a standardized test, so they have to grade everything the same way. And so if you can model another person and how they got a 6, chances are you do really well on your essays as well. All right, phase 3. So for phase 3, this is like test environment. So now we're timing ourselves. We're doing the whole practice test with the essay from start to finish. And so what this is gonna do now is it's gonna force you to learn pace. It's gonna test your endurance. And also you're gonna have to learn, okay, when do I skip a question? When do I mark it and move on and come back to it? And so you're gonna start to learn your rhythm as well, which is really important. And also the Kaplan book does a good job of explaining all this in in phase 1, when you're reading through like strategy and all that. They also mention like how much you should typically spend on each question. But like when you're actually taking the test, you can see the time. It'll show you how long you spent on that question. But also like, you'll start to get a feel after so many practice tests, like, all right, if I don't get it by this many seconds, I'm just gonna mark it, I'm gonna move on, and then at the end, I'm gonna come back to it and I'm gonna finish it, because at the end of the day, all the questions are worth the same. It's better to move on to the ones you know how to do, that you can solve quicker, and if you have time at the end, go back to it, mark whatever you think is best. And sometimes it's like a physics problem, how like you go away from it, and then when you come back to it later, it'll pop in your head and you'll figure it out. That's happened multiple times for me, and so these are just kind of things you'll figure out along the way. So those are the 3 main phases that I would recommend. I'm gonna leave you off with some successful studying tips that I think help. And so the first one being, don't skip over the things that you don't know or that you don't understand. It's very common knowledge, but it's anxiety can get to you, and anxiety will sometimes like divert you towards things you already know, and you'll study that more, and the things you don't know you just kind of skip over. But really it's important that you guys actually spend the time. You guys don't get it yourself and the book doesn't help. Find someone that does get it, because next time you see that question, if you don't do anything about it, you're gonna get it wrong again. But if you choose to get that help, next time you see that type of question, it's literally free points. That's how you do well. Like, you want to make mistakes now. Like, if you get a poor score in your practice test, it doesn't matter. But if you do well in the real one, that does matter. So make your mistakes now. Don't get discouraged. Be happy to make those mistakes now. Learn from them. And then when you do it on a real test, free points, you're gonna do great. Last but not least, consistency, guys. Like the GRE, that's probably the biggest thing that I can tell you guys. When I was studying on and off, like, I would make progress, then I would stop, and then 2 or 3 or 4, maybe even a couple months later, like, it's all gone, you know? So consistency is key. Make sure you're doing this every day. If not, like, take a day or 2 off for the weekend or whatever you need to do, but be really consistent, especially with vocab. Vocab is huge, and vocab comes and goes pretty quickly if you don't do it consistently. So with that said, guys, that's pretty much it. Thank you for joining me on this video. If you guys feel like this content was helpful to you guys, please smash that like button. And if you guys want to see more content like this, make sure to smash the subscribe button. And if you have any questions that I haven't addressed, make sure to put it down below, not just for yourself, but for the whole pre-PT community. If you have a question, someone else probably does too. And that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm the 2.4 pre-PT, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.